I'm not really sure where to begin with this film. Is film even the right word? This cinematic fever dream is pretty clearly the result of a man's singular vision, both in how bold and innovative it feels, and also to its detriment. I mean, it's incoherent in just about every way a film is able to be. It really feels like the musings of someone who read a philosophy book and got high. It's an extremely bizarre ride. There's nuggets of genius hidden behind the boulders of madness, and none of these nuggets manage to outweigh the complete insanity that has to be endured to find a reason to watch this, other than it being a spectacle. If I was to sum up Megalopolis, it would be a filmmaker of a bygone era who is attempting to usher in a new one. It's evident the time Coppola came up in and his proclivities. The way he writes women is completely archaic, the pure sexualization, the infatuation with women being sexualized beings or holding virtually no autonomy. It's insulting to see a movie this large treat its women as completely in service to its men. Nathalie Emmanuel's character, Julia, is so devoid of any characterization other than her devotion to Adam Driver, who plays Caesar, or trying to show her father that Caesar is a good guy. It falls into the genius male trope as well, which feels so dated now. A woman falls hopelessly in love with a man because he's a genius. And worse, in this movie, he's a misunderstood genius that only Julia is able to see. The instigating scene of her falling for Caesar is the scene that's been making the rounds on the internet.
Go back to the club.
And I really sat down watching this stupidly funny scene and realised that moments after being completely insulted by this man, she brushes this off because of, I don't know, his genius? I actually found myself laughing that something this backwards was screening in cinemas. When so much of the movie is framed from her perspective as well, and how she is so enamored by Caesar, instead of being compelled by her feelings, it just becomes laughable really. It's insulting to her character, but also it just hurts the idea Coppola is trying to convey of Caesar being this misunderstood genius. This issue plagues essentially every other female in the film. It felt very much like the direction was act sexy. The only saving grace is Aubrey Plaza, who ends up being the highlight of the film. I think this comes down to Plaza understanding what film she was in and being able to elevate what was written on the page. Were she to play her character as serious as the other actors in the film, I could see her being another overly sexualized and underwritten character. But her performance allows her character to be some level of camp, which works brilliantly, and is a nice respite from the seriousness of every other character. I guess bar Shia LaBeouf also weirdly works in the context of this film, as he's just weird. It's sad that the film sets up some interesting characters, like Caesar, but is not interested in exploring any of them in any depth whatsoever. It's perhaps why Aubrey Plaza and Shia LaBeouf stand out, as they are wild and silly. It's clear that we're not going to get into any depth with them, so they become fun to watch. Both leads are just so boring and flat, it often feels like they are saying lines, like you are able to feel the words on the page and how empty those words feel. Just because your characters recite Shakespeare and Marcus Aurelius, and poetically yearn for an ushering in of a new society, doesn't equate you to exploring these ideas in any depth whatsoever. It's insulting to an audience to set up some sort of discussion surrounding civilization and modern sensibilities, and squash any sort of conversation, and instead be presented with the ramblings of a very privileged individual. What's more is these ramblings also lack any substance. The movie feels void of any real ideas. On one hand, you have an incredibly privileged man who believes civilization is destroying the world, and the only way to build a utopia is to destroy the world as it is. And then on the other hand, you have a mayor who wants to focus on helping people now. And he's painted to be the villain? I think the messaging is just very lost, and feels like there's multiple ideas which are attempted to be explored, and are either just abandoned, or we get resolutions to ideas which were never explored in the first place. Since there's so much going on, stuff just happens in the movie that's never really touched upon. Like his wife, or the Megalon, or the satellite. But the biggest offender is that the film builds up this idea of this Megalopolis, and it's just built in the background. Like, suddenly it just exists. Literally, there's a few scenes of building, and then suddenly a whole utopia is just there. The biggest assumption this film makes is that society is constructed by noble men of wealth and in positions of power, which they only obtain through their wealth. Now, this sets up itself for a really interesting deconstruction of privilege, should that be what Coppola was trying to do, but it's not. Instead, this is an ideology which runs right through the film, without so much as an attempt to push back at this ideology. I mean, you could argue that that's what Shia LaBeouf's character was trying to do, like become this figurehead for the people upset at the super wealthy, but this falls apart very quickly. The crowds he rallies, which for some reason are radicalized, turn on him as he turns out to only be interested in wealth himself. Him and Caesar both are privileged, but he is this freak, and Caesar is portrayed as this savior of humanity. So why is Caesar portrayed like such a beacon of hope? Because he's noble in his use of wealth? His entire story is just focused on building his utopia, not for some moralistic purpose, but for some self-serving reason. Giving this film any ounce of thought makes it fall apart so quickly. If it wasn't evident from the fact that this film got made, that it was funded by Coppola himself, the classism and privilege baked into the narrative would certainly give clues. In a way, the idea that Caesar is this completely selfish person who is desperate to make his creation of this perfect utopia only he knows how to build, and is clearly not for anyone else other than himself, could mirror the production of this film. But that really isn't a compelling narrative. It really becomes evident that the film is a complete mess once you reach the conclusion. I honestly would say that while before the conclusion it's still not a good movie, I was invested and actually thought he might land on something striking. Instead, the ending is the most ridiculously inauthentic conclusion possible. I guess the world would be fine if we all just spoke to each other, but also really listened to a mad genius man as well, because he knows what's best for the world. No interesting resolution between the ideologies of his characters. Instead, everyone just succumbs to this man, and everything is fixed. It defeats any interest in any of the characters if it ends with everyone getting on. It's not all horrendous. As I said, I do think there are small glimmers of interesting ideas which are explored, but they're quickly abandoned for someone to give another monologue reciting a famous big thinker. It's also really pretty in some parts as well, but even then, there's some scenes which just look horrendous. Like, everything in this film, it's just so incoherent. When scene to scene your film feels like it isn't flowing, like every actor is acting in a different movie, where there's incoherent style, that's simply bad direction given. I think had this not had a name like Coppola's attached to this film, it would flat out just be called a miss. I do love when a director makes a really big swing and we get these swirling, ambitious entries into auteur cinema. I was a massive fan of Bardo and really appreciate Beau is Afraid. And while I respect Coppola for making something as ambitious as this, it's just so disjointed and quite honestly lackluster to really leave any lasting impression. There's nothing of substance. Thanks for watching this video. It's a little bit different from my normal video essays. I'm in the middle of writing a really long one, so it's taken me ages. I would love to know your thoughts on Megalopolis. If you are a hater or somehow enjoyed Coppola's mess, like, subscribe, do all that YouTubey stuff, and don't forget to let me know in the comments below what you found in frames.
Entitles you to plow through the riches of my Emersonian mind?
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.
Entitles me?
Yes.